He had problems, he had difficulties, and those difficulties hurt me and hurt you perhaps. But he didn't get up and walk through the day thinking, how can I just kick him between the legs and make him hurt some more? How can I wound him? How can I really mess him up for a lifetime so he's struggling because of me for the rest of his life? Do you think your dad ever thought that? Now, there may be a real small percentage who do. And God help you. We'll talk about that. But for most of us, the problem for our dad was not that they were malicious, but they were dealing with their own unpacked luggage. And all of a sudden we realized they weren't the hero we thought they were. They were just men with clay feet just like us. And the older we get, the more we realize how difficult it is to be a dad, right? And if we've got stuff that we're still struggling with, we can get so preoccupied with that and our work and other things that just by the force of all of that, we become hurtful dads, but we never, ever intended to do that. You don't think my dad that I've told you about wishes that he could have been more connected to me? I know he would have. And one day I got in touch with that. I was on a retreat in Colorado one day, and part of that day I started thinking about my dad, just thinking about what were the good things I experienced with my dad. And there were a lot of good things, as I've told you about. But one of the things that hit me in that moment, because I was still struggling with anger and that, but one of the things that hit me in that moment was I began to think of all the things that I wish me and my dad could have done that we didn't get to do. And this may sound strange to you guys, but I think that was the first time I ever thought those thoughts about what we missed. Not what he did, but what we missed. That's a whole different thought pattern. And suddenly when I started thinking about all the things that I wish we had had more of or we could have done, for the first time, I told you I didn't feel a lot when I was a young man, except anger. But for the first time, these big old tears came to my eyes, which kind of surprised me because I'm not a weepy type at all. And then the more I thought about it, the more the tears began to just flood down my face. And I began to find myself kind of banging the table, not in anger anymore, but in grief over what I missed and what he missed and what we missed together. And I know he didn't want to miss those things. And then something magical happened. In the midst of those tears, I forgave my dad. Because I realized he never, ever intended to do the things that actually happened in our home. And you know, men, you'll never be free from the past until you can let Dad go. Until you can forgive him and realize he was just a man. You wanted him to be your hero, but he was just a man with his own stuff. Now, I also mentioned, though, there may be a few of you who said, no, you don't know my dad. My dad was evil. And you know, to be real honest, because I believe in evil, there probably are some guys out there who just chose, even in the face of a family, to do evil to them. And if that's the few of you, then you have another choice. It's not so much to forgive your dad, but just simply to release your dad to God's ultimate justice. Here's what the Scripture says in Romans chapter 12, verse 19. It says, "Never take your own revenge, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, and I will repay.'" I want you to know we live in a moral universe. And though justice will not be wrapped up in this life, what the Bible promises from Genesis to Revelation is that there will be justice. You can count on that. And so, if there have been hurts inflicted upon you that were hurts of evil, you know, it's time to just let that go and not try to get even. Because there will be a time for justice. So release your dad to God's justice. So, if you're a son wounded by dad, choose to touch this wound responsibly. Fifth, if you're a son wounded by dad, courageously seek reconciliation with your father. If you're a son wounded by dad, courageously seek reconciliation with your father. Guys, look up here for just a moment. If you're a son and you feel a separation from your dad's not going to come to you. This is you stepping up to manhood. If you want reconciliation, you need to go to dad. And in going to dad, you're going to find something change in you. Suddenly, you're going to be stepping up into manhood, and you're going to feel that as you approach your father and try to heal the breach that you feel in your relationship. Now, there may be separation between you and dad that springs from dad's relational shortcomings. And if there's that, then don't let that stop you. Because sometimes dad just doesn't know how to do it. Maybe you had the experience of calling your dad when you were in college. I had this experience, but I found out it's a common experience. You're a son, you're away for the first time, you're at college, you pick up the phone, you want to call family and just hear from them, and you call, and my dad answers the phone. I say, Dad, this is Robert. And here's what he said. Okay, let me get your mother. See, you've had that experience. And you know what you need to do is you need to call home, and your dad will answer the phone and say, Dad, this is Robert. Let me get your mother. No, Dad. I want to talk to you. Do you get it? You. Stay on the phone. I had a young man in men's fraternity who wanted that kind of relationship with his dad. His dad just was real aloof. He called his dad and said, Dad, I want to spend a weekend with you. I'm going to drive up to Cincinnati and spend a weekend with you. His dad said, I can't do that. I'm too busy. He said, no, Dad, I want to spend a weekend with you. When can you do it? Next week? No, I'm busy. How about the following? No, I'm busy. And he just stayed in there. He refused to back down until his dad finally said, Son, you really want to visit with me, don't you? He said, Dad, I just want a weekend, just you and me. And so he drove up to Cincinnati. He planned out a few things for his dad. They got in the car and they drove around, and he started asking his dad all these special questions about them and about what he felt and what it was like for him growing up and all that. And at the end of that time, his dad did something magical. He reached over and put his arm around his son and said, Son, I want to thank you for this. This has been incredible. But you know, for Tim to do that, it took all the guts he had. Because he was walking right into the father wound to heal that breach. But that's how real manhood finally springs forth from a son. There may be separation between you and your dad that springs from some past conflict, and you need to clean it up. You know, there are a lot of sons who've said hurtful things to their dads, or their dads have said hurtful things to them. And they don't know what to do with that. They still continue and they kind of bury that and go on with the relationship, but there's that hurt that's still there. I remember Ken Canfield talking about what he said to his dad when he was a teenager before he left home. His dad was trying to help him think through where he was going to go with his life, and Ken turned to his dad and said, You're just a dumb factory worker. How would you know? His dad had given his whole life to go into the factory, to take care of his family, and just crushed his dad's spirit. Now, they continued on with their relationship, but that hurt just lingered there. Some of you have said things to your dad that just put hurt there, or a conflict. Maybe you had a fight. It's never been reconciled. Ken said years later he was with his dad and they were driving down the road, and it was just quiet in the cab of the truck. He turned and looked at his dad, and he said, "Dad, do you remember years ago when I called you a dumb factory worker?" And his dad began to cry. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm proud of you." There's those kind of hurtful moments. You need to repair those. Take the initiative to do that. That's walking into the father wound. Okay, number 6. If you're a son wounded by dad, risk asking for your father's love. There are some of you in the room who you would say to me after the session, "You know, I've never heard my dad say, 'I love you.'" And that's important. I want to hear that, okay? If you want to hear it, put on the chin strap and go ask him. Go ask him. I remember Gordon Dalby talking about a young man named Peter who had that same problem. And he said, "Call your dad or go see your dad and just ask him." And so he went to his dad and he said, "Dad, do you love me?" And the dad looked at him and said, "Son, you know, I love all my children." And he grabbed his dad's cheeks and he said, "No, Dad, do you love me?" That's what he needed to hear. And his dad finally said, "Son, I do. I love you." That's what I needed to hear. And listen, guys, if you need to hear that from your dad, go ask him. Now, I know he may have shortcomings in his own life. He may have difficulty expressing that. He may not be able to even say it, but something will be healed in you just by asking the question. Because rather than being just a son, you've stepped up to being a man. And that's the key to authentic manhood. 7th, if you're a son wounded by dad, risk asking for your father's blessing. Some of you have never gotten a blessing from Dad. He's never really kind of given you that ultimate affirmation where what you're doing with your life or the way you're doing it, that there's something about it that He could put His hand on you and say, "Son, I am so excited about you. I'm proud of you. I love you. I'm excited for you." And there's been that vacuum there that's hurt you. Maybe you went a different way than He wanted you to go. And so you've always wondered how He's felt about you in that regard. I had a young man in men's fraternity who came to me and told me that his dad had a family business and he was the only son of 3 other sons that decided to break with the family business. And because he was the oldest son, there was a lot of static and issues between him and his dad over him leaving the family business and striking out on his own. He wanted to be a physician. And his dad chided him for that and made him feel guilty for that, as he was being disloyal for leaving this family company and doing the things that he wanted to do. And so he left not feeling a blessing, but feeling a hurt from his dad. Lunch, and we talked about it one day. We were sitting there over lunch, and this just shows how deep it is. This prominent surgeon sat there and never ate his salad. He just cried into it. Because more than anything else, he wanted to have his dad's blessing over his life. Now, his dad lived in Houston, Texas, and I said, "Listen," I said, "you know what you ought to do? You ought to call the hospital and cancel your appointments and go out and buy a plane ticket on Southwest and get down there and ask your dad for a blessing." And he did it. And his dad struggled with it. But about a month later, he called me on the phone and he said, "Can we go out and have lunch again? I want to share with you a letter that Dad sent me." Here's the letter. I want to read it to you. Here's what he said. "Dear Tom, I love you more than you will ever know. I am so proud of you, your brilliant mind, your tenacity, your tender, loving heart, your determination to go the second, third, or many more miles as it takes to make a good marriage. You have a God-like love that never gives up. And Tom, I want you to look into my heart today. Wherever I go in this world, my heart fills with pride when I say, my son is a doctor, a surgeon. He helps save lives every day. Tom, I want you to know I have felt pain and hurt in my lifetime. The pain of depression. The pain of, at one point, having no hope, not even having any food. The pain of being a dropout from high school with no one who seemed to care for me. The pain of going to college with no money and no letters and no help. But the deepest pain I have ever felt was when I hurt you with stupid, foolish words. Oh, how I have wept when I think how I hurt you, my beloved son. I weep even now as I write this. Please, please erase those words. They were not from my heart. Please forgive from your heart and think of me as not only your daddy, but your best friend and supporter. I know you have forgiven me, but I wanted you to hear my heart cry, only the guilty need mercy. Tom, I remember when I saw you and held you and loved you. When you were a little boy in bed one night, you were scared and you said, Daddy, are you awake? And I said, yes, Tom, I'm awake. And you said in a few minutes, Daddy, is your face turned towards me? And I said, yes, it is. And a frightened little boy went to sleep. Tom, I want you to know that my face is still turned towards you and will never be turned away. Sleep well, my son. Your old daddy will always love you and help you. Now let me tell you, was that a blessing or what? And you know, every young man longs to have that from his father. But if you don't have it, then maybe what you need to do is get up and go ask for it. That's real manhood. Then lastly, if you're a son wounded by dad, you can reclaim the relationship you missed as a son by becoming a good dad to your children. You know, for the most part, that's what I've had to do. To not repeat my family history that I grew up in, I had to make a choice sometime in my life. And that choice was that I was going to live in a way with my children the way my dad had not lived with me. And I was going to ask for help, and I was going to read books, and I was going to step up to authentic manhood and go ask for my dad's blessing and do all the rest. Everything that I've told you, in some degree, I've done. And the question is, has it been worth it? Has it been worth it? You better believe it has. Because of all the experiences that I missed as a son, I reclaimed as a dad. My dad never said a spiritual word to me. I've been on my knees with my sons in prayer. My dad was at ball games, but he was always back in that rambler, sitting way back from the practice field or way up in the last row of the stands. I've been on the practice field. I've been his coach. I've watched him run out on the field and given him high fives. I've run out after the game and lifted him up in victory. We've fished. We've hunted. We've cried together. I'll be at his wedding. But I get to do all the things as a dad that I missed as a son. And it'll be worth it. That's what you have the opportunity to do. And that's how you walk into this absent father wound. Now I want to close with a poem. It's a poem that I saw one day in a book, and I thought, gosh, that just reminds me so much of the past and where I am right now. And the poem's title was My Father's Chair. And you've probably been wondering what this chair is on the stage. This was my dad's chair. And at 308 South Bonner in Ruston, Louisiana, I used to see him come home from the insurance agency every night and sit in this chair. And the dog would jump up in his lap, kind of curl up, and he'd start watching the nightly news, and sometimes he'd fall asleep, and sometimes he'd just watch TV till it was time to go to bed. There were times he was inebriated, and he would come and sit in this chair. His eyes would roll back in his head, and he'd fall asleep. And this chair kind of became a symbol for what I missed. And it sits in our house. I rarely sit in it, but it sits in our house. But it reminds me, because I have my own chair. And then I saw this poem, and I thought, this poem says what I felt about this chair and my chair. Here's what it says. Sometimes at night, and this is speaking of the past, I'd lie awake, longing inside for my father's embrace, wishing as hard as I possibly can for my dad to be more than the invisible man. It's so hard for a child to live life all alone, waiting for Dad to wake up in his home. My father's chair sat in an empty room. My father's chair covered with sheets of gloom. My father's chair, through all the years and all the tears, I cried in vain, but no one was there in my father's chair. But there's another chair in our house. And this is verse 2. Sometimes at night I sit all alone, drifting asleep in a chair of my own. Now when sweet sleepy eyes peer down the hall, frightened by dreams that they cannot recall, I personally hold them close and calming their fears, praying that they will always say, my father's chair sits in a loving room. My father's chair, no matter what I do. My father's chair, through all the years and all the tears, I need not fear because love is always there in my father's chair. You know what time it is, men? It's time to face the father wound. We'll see you next week.